Hi there. Welcome to something a bit different. My name's Nevin, and this is my Game Jam Diary. So I'm writing this a little after the fact, but I basically just finished up a 2-week game jam and I made my first game. In the grand scheme of things, yeah, I know this is a pretty small experience, but for me, it's kind of a big deal, which is why I want to sit here and talk about the whole damn experience for you. If I had to summarize it, I'd say that this whole experience was a lot like when I took Code Academy courses for 3 months and I suddenly understood programmer jokes. Except this time it's with game dev and I now understand self-loathing and I have a more founded understanding of the behind-the-scenes aspects of this industry that I've been arm's length from for most of my life. Throughout the 2 weeks of the jam, I took notes on what we did, and now that it's over with, I've gone through and made those notes into something more presentable. The goal of this isn't to posture myself as some sort of newly formed, accomplished game developer. This video is, honestly, mostly for me. I've finally done something that I've wanted to do for so long, and I've learned way more than I thought I would from it, regardless of the small scale of the project. So basically, I want to reflect on this project for myself, but I also want to share with you what I can of this experience and the things I've learned. Last thing I think I need to talk about before we really get started is exactly what this game jam is. For a couple weeks before the jam started, people created and submitted art for fake retro game cartridges. Here's a look at some of them while I'm talking about shit. The actual jam was 2 weeks from April 9th through 25th, and at the start of it, you'd pick a cart and you go make a game for it for that amount of time. And I think that's pretty much all you need to know before we get to the good shit, so let's get to the good shit. Oh boy! I just got back from the Jam kickoff meetup, and I gotta say I'm super fucking excited. Anybody with a game idea stood up in front of the class and presented the idea to the group. Then we all kind of goofed off for a bit and discussed our ideas, and then we put a few teams together. Joining my team for this game jam are Chris Zito, a freelance artist, and David Snodder, who is a coder with some actual experience compared to my, we'll say, limited experience. I had ideas for a few of the carts, but I ended up going with this one. Chris, David, and myself brainstormed ideas for the game for a little bit before splitting up for the night, but we do have the core figured out. The player's going to be standing in the middle of an intersection and you're going to be directing traffic, because you're a traffic cop. We want the game to have 3 levels with increasing difficulty, and we want them to add more mechanics and sort of work as a tutorial as you play. Losing is gonna happen if you fail to direct cars, or you get run over, or if you get hit by a car that doesn't stop at an intersection, all sorts of things. And as a counter to both of those failure states, the player is gonna be able to attack cars with this dash attack style move. Features-wise, this is pretty small, so we think we can manage to get it done within the 2 weeks. And most importantly, we're all pretty damn pumped about this right now. The goal for today was pretty simple since I've never touched Game Maker before. I want to get a sprite to face a direction depending on the button you press on your keyboard. After that's working, I'll figure out how to make pointing work. The idea behind this is that it's going to take 2 buttons to direct a single car, and we only want the player directing 1 car at a time. This adds a little more pressure and kind of makes the player have to prioritize cars when they come to the intersection. I made a little temp asset to work on this. The pink dot is the face direction, where the sprite is pointing. On a code level, how this is working is that there's a variable keeping track of how many key presses are left until a reset value, and each key press runs a check to see if the value of the variable is at X, and if it is, then you face the direction you press, and it lowers the variable's value by 1. I sent David what I had so we have a base to start from and he can start working on things tomorrow, and I wrote out a document of what needs to be done and in what order we prioritize it. It's a basic roadmap, but I think it's going to help us stay on track and really get this done. While David was working on getting the basics of cars up and running, I worked on finishing up how pointing works. As After adding some arms to the square that I made, it was a lot easier to tell if it was working or not. I was able to get all the pointing directions in and functional, and I got direction facing down how I wanted it as well. So STC points in 2 directions before rotating again. We also got concept art from Zito today. 2 ideas for STC's design. Whichever of these bad boys we pick is gonna be what informs the rest of the game's visuals. We're going with the edgier one, cause duh, you can't be pseudo-cyberpunk if you're not as edgy as hell, right? We had a little bit of a planning for the weekend chat this morning to figure out what our goals are or what milestones we want to hit before the end of the day, Saturday and Sunday. We also had a couple new ideas for things we could add to the game, but in an effort to keep the scope from getting fucking stupid and to not add too much onto the project, a lot of the ideas, meaning all of the ideas, are getting noted down under a list of if we get all the other shit in and this thing even runs category. I think they call that stretch goals on Kickstarter. The plan for today is for David to get cars in and moving along the road, going forward and turning 2 directions each. And for me to get a prototype version of the player's attack in. Once those are done, we're gonna have to spend some time figuring out how to combine our branches and the free version of Game Maker Studio 2, since it doesn't actually allow for version control systems to be used, and the feature GMS has for adding resources also does not exist in the free version. Go figure, right? It's like they want you to buy this or something. Zito is working on some art and aims to have new assets to us by the end of the day on Sunday, so I'm stoked to see what he comes up with, because that's gonna choice. Gonna be good. For a while, it was looking like we wouldn't be able to get the handful of things for today actually done, but we did it! I finished up the point direction stuff, and I added in a bit where if there's no second input, the player will revert to an idle state. This is so if you make a bad input on your first point, you can easily recover from it. I like this because instead of just removing points or something or cutting out the time you have left, it adds a bit more flow to the pressure a player will be under throughout the game. Also, check out this super sexy title screen. That's definitely final asset right there. And I did get the basics of the dash attack thing in, and that's what you can see right here. This may change depending on how we end up pacing the final game, but right now, in order to attack in a direction, the player needs to hold the opposite direction on the arrow keys. It's a little unintuitive, but while they're holding the button down, their attack charges up, and once it's charged, they can release to dash and slice in the direction they're facing, and then they zip back to the home position. The idea behind this is that it'll show commitment to the attack in the form of preparation for the incoming car, while also adding that sort of standoff goodness from old samurai action movies. And then the fun part of the day, we got to work on getting our branches merged. So David and I would actually both be working from the same baseline, and future implementations and tweaks would be a little easier. So you remember how I said we'd have to figure this out? Yes, it turns out in order to actually implement stuff in the free version for kind of how we were working on this, we'd basically have to copy, paste, and rebuild everything from one version into the other, which if we had more time, wouldn't be that bad. But we don't have more time. So David volunteered to pick up the paid version of GMS2 and see if that could make this merge work, and hey, good news, it did. David got everything implemented into one stable build, passed me a copy, and I began working on a few final tweaks for the day, including file cleanup and getting some of the new art in. This is where we are now. There's a lot of placeholder assets, including the background, but it's really starting to feel like we have a game coming together. Based on what we discussed yesterday and a quick chat we had this morning, the goals for today are staying the same. We knew I wasn't going to have much time, if any, to work on coding things today, so David took the wheel on that. He made some progress tweaking car paths and the attacking system, and here's what he got. With the little free time that I did have today, I worked on some sound effects. I'd never built sounds from scratch before, and this was actually pretty fun. I made a couple different effects for the attack so it's not always the same sound playing, and you can listen. Making these was actually pretty simple too. I just grabbed a bunch of metal shit that we had around the house, mainly some knives, a coffee mug with a metal handle, and a pizza cutter, and I spent about half an hour recording a bunch of different interactions with each of the things. Then I saved the best sounds and took them into Audition for tweaking, layering, and effects. Now that things are starting to come together, we're gonna have to make some decisions on how we actually want the final thing to play. Based on what we have and how it's being built out, I don't think we'll have the time to get things 100% where we want them, but I'm okay with that. I also don't think we'll necessarily need to be cutting features, but we're gonna change how they work and how they feel. This morning before work, we talked about where the project currently is and how some of the mechanics are shaping up versus our original ideas, and we've decided to change how the pacing of the game is going to be overall. Instead of directing infinite cars as they come at you from each direction, 4 cars are going to come to the intersection and need to be directed in a set amount of time, and they're going to share a timer that's displayed at the top of the screen. Any cars left over after the timer runs out are going to try to run you over all at once. We still want to try and get some cars in that just come straight for you and ignore the intersection laws of traffic and all that, but pacing things out into rounds like this will be a bit easier to build, and I think it'll make it easier for players to get the hang of the game instead of just getting run over constantly immediately. Also, this way we can zoom in a bit more on the action since we don't need to see more than 1 car from each direction, so this makes things bigger and easier for the player to read. I whipped up a couple more sounds today and mixed some effects with the GIF from yesterday to see if it's going to be too much noise, and I think it might be. It feels like it's going to be. Here's the clip. So for that clip, I worked a bit more on the slice sounds, and I whipped up a new sound for the player's dash back to the center of the scene. Since we're crunched for time, I kinda just used the teleportation sound from Dragon Ball Z and I tweaked it a bunch. It's seriously just the sound effect when they move really quick. Like, that's all it is with some effects. We also got some new art from Zito, which I'm really excited to implement alongside the rest of these sounds. And lastly, David was able to get traffic direction working so you can actually tell cars where to go now. We have a main feature of the game in there. Cool, right? Tonight was pretty damn fun. Storm, another member of DSOP, hosted a Game Maker Studio class and helped David and I and a couple others get bugs fixed as well as get some ideas for polish and game feel goodness figured out. After the class, Zito, David, and myself had a chat about the game's current state versus where we want it to be by Friday night. We ended up setting a few goals. Mainly that we need to get the interaction between the timer and the cars working so we can get some playtesting done this Saturday and have enough time to make whatever changes we need to before the 24th. Some friends are coming over to my place Saturday, and I'm going to be sending whatever build we have at the time to a couple of online pals, so if we have all the basic features in, I think we'll be able to get some pretty good feedback. David's going to be working on the game tomorrow, and I'll probably be picking up main branch work over the weekend after the playtesting. Between now and Saturday, I'm going to try and figure out some of the juice ideas that Storm gave us while we wait for the last few assets, and David's going to work on the timer and a couple of other effects. Over the last couple nights, we managed to get some nice polish implemented, and we're working on getting some effects finalized while also trying to get the game's style a bit more cohesive because right now it's all over the place. The class on Wednesday led to a discussion with the group yesterday about what we can do to make the game feel more cohesive in the short amount of time we have left, because, like I said, in its current state, there's not really a defined style, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that we haven't gotten our last few assets yet, because Zito's just a busy guy, and that's totally fine, but it's definitely pushing some things out further than we'd like. We decided to do what we can to add a bit more noir aesthetic to our game without having to redo or wait on art. So obviously it's a noir. We added some rain to the game and a vignette around the whole screen to make the edges darker, and then added some lighting around SCC to help them stand out during gameplay that can honestly get kind of visually noisy. David's working on fixing hitboxes and adding some explosion effects, which is gonna add a lot to the feel overall. We're also gonna add screen shake and hit freeze when STC attacks a car, so it's like fucking feels good. Once we have the final background art, we can fix the paths of the cars and make sure hitboxes, timing, blah 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 are all solid and good to go with. In the meantime, we need to fine tune what gameplay we can and work on some UI stuff. Watching people play your game is a very interesting experience. It's kind of surreal. Even though our project isn't finished yet, just seeing how somebody interacts with systems you and a team created and actually having fun is unlike anything else. You could compare it to something like a movie that you made or a piece of art that you made, but it's still not quite the same. I think because of the interactivity of games and the type of involvement I've had with this project, the feeling kind of stands on its own and it's pretty hard to put into proper words. So, like I said, we had some playtesting today and we got some great feedback, both in the sense that what was said was positive and also the sense that we've got a pretty solid idea of what we need to work on and feel confident that we can get this game to a good place before the jam ends. So, some things of note. We need to adjust the timer because it doesn't give new players enough time to think about what they need to do. We also need to work on visuals. The biggest note we got, and we really already knew this, is that while we have pieces of certain aesthetics, nothing feels consistent. This is definitely in part because we're using temp assets for street and background art, but it's also specifically pointed out that the current cars feel like a huge clash with what we want the game to be. We do have another car body that Zito sent us, so I'm gonna see what I can do with that to make things a bit easier to read and more stylistically consistent. We're gonna spend the next few days making tweaks and final decisions on features in addition to everything else I just said. David and I are both at this point pretty ready to be done with this project, which is a little surprising given how short of a time it's been. I think it probably has to do with how hard we've been working on this. Like, it's come home from work, maybe eat some food, sit down and work on this. And then in the morning after I go to the gym, I work on this before I go to work. And while I'm at work, I'm thinking about this game and we're chatting about what we need to do. It's a lot. And I think I'm starting to understand the kind of burnout that full-time developers have to go through at times. I can very easily see why this kind of work schedule on a regular basis is unhealthy. Two more full days between now and the end of the jam, and we are feature complete. We got the final background art from Zito last night and we were able to get that plugged in, which means that we can get the pathing and spacing finished up for cars so that they don't just kill the player all the time. There's still a fair bit of polish that we want to add, some balancing that needs to be done, and a couple of stretch goals we had that we'd still like to try and implement. And from an overall visual standpoint, this still isn't as cohesive as I want it to be, so I want to spend some time doing what I can on that front. But at the same time, I'm discouraging the team from doing any kind of crunch-style behaviors. I feel like because this is a small project and an incredibly small team, calling something like this crunch is kind of weird. Like, crunch is typically associated with these big-end production teams, but in reality, it is all over the place on all sorts of projects. And at this point, because of how things have ended up playing out, we've found ourselves in this weird position that I can kind of only describe as crunchy. So as weird as it feels to say, we're definitely tempted to go into crunch mode these last couple of days, but instead, I'm gonna talk to David and we're gonna see what we need, in all caps, done, and only work on that and cut everything else. In the end, this won't end up anywhere near how we wanted it to be or how we want it to be at this point. But the important part is we'll be avoiding an unhealthy mode of work. And honestly, we are already plenty proud of the fact that we're actually making this thing and it's gonna be playable, so no real losses. It's the day before the end of the jam, and holy crap, we've actually finished the game, basically. As I'm writing this, David is tweaking two more things, and then he's gonna make the final build EXE for us to take to the meetup tomorrow. We ended up mainly focusing on project cleanup, bug testing, and figuring out how to explain the game to players since it's a pretty weird control scheme. I created some menus including credits and a how to play thing, but goddamn, that's just a lot of text, and I know I sure as hell wouldn't want to spend the time to read it. Originally, the game was going to function as its own tutorial, back when we were going to do levels, but it just didn't go that way, and we don't have time to build a tutorial at this point. So, c'est la vie, I guess. We're alive, it's done, we made a game, and tomorrow, people are going to play it and tell us what they think. That's fucking wild. It's kind of hard to place how I feel right now. I've actually made a functional, kind of fun game in 2 weeks. Honestly, I don't think this would have come near as far as it did without the help of David, Zito, Storm, and everybody else that actually had hands and gave feedback and helped out with this. I'm incredibly excited for tomorrow, and as I was writing this, David sent me the final build, so I guess it's time to play that and pop open a beer. Hopefully we don't find any last minute bugs. Man, wow, okay. I just got home from the wrap-up meeting for the game jam. Everyone who made something brought it, and it was just a big room of a bunch of people hanging out and playing each other's games. It was so much fun, and we got a lot of really great feedback on our game. That said, we're pretty burned out on it at this point, and we are ready to work on pretty much anything else. We unanimously agreed that we never want to touch this again. If we ever do, someday in the unforeseeable future, want to work on Samurai Traffic Cop again, we all agreed that we want to build it from the ground up and really make it as kick-ass as we can by taking proper time and implementing all sorts of the ideas that we got tonight. I also learned that no matter how much you explain something to somebody, nothing works as well as a tutorial for explaining a game, especially one like ours with weird controls. So if there's one thing I would add to STC, that's what it would be, a real tutorial. But I mean, apart from having to manually explain everything to everybody, a bunch of people liked it. We got some great quotes that are gonna go up on the itch page, including these. It's a game. Hey, it plays. Oh, okay, this is actually pretty fun. Why does cutting a car feel better than directing traffic if you're supposed to be directing traffic? And one of my friends sent this to me earlier. It feels like I'm directing traffic in real life, which is just a dream come true. So that's the thing. We've made the game, it's done, and now I need to clean up the script and make the video. Hey, take a look at the date of this entry. That's how long I've been working on this project. Oh my god. Oh my god! Anyway, to wrap up and close out this video, I have some thoughts. This whole dumb idea was super fun and rewarding, and I completely plan on doing another game jam, and I already have ideas churning in my head for my next project. I got to experience some aspects of the games industry that I've heard about but never really had to deal with within the context of games themselves. Scope control, team management, design, and actual construction and implementation are all things I've dealt with in the other industries I've worked in or projects I've been a part of, but within the framework of this game jam, it felt totally different. Maybe because games are this whole weird medium that nothing else is quite like, it's kind of hard to say for sure. But either way, I have some very solidified respect for people who work within this industry. I feel like I have a better grasp on how exhausting this stuff can be, but I also understand why you'd subject yourself to that. It's rewarding when it's all said and done, as long as you don't kill yourself doing it. And that sounds like an exaggeration, but it's not. That it crunch is a very real problem. And even though I only had a small taste of it, I know now how bad it can get. I don't think full-time game dev is for me, at all. But I do want to continue this on a hobby level, and if people like what I make, then hey, that's pretty cool. Overall, this project was far more intimidating than it really had any right to be. If you have some kind of hobby or project that you want to try out but seems a little scary, you should work towards actually doing it, instead of being like me up to this point and just tell yourself that you'll do it when you have time. Because when you have time will never come. If you want to do something, you have to make the time to do it. I have a bunch more thoughts on this project, but they don't really fit into the purviews of this video, and I don't want to ramble any longer than I already have because I just looked at the recording time and that's crazy. So I'm gonna call it here for now. If you have any questions about any of this at all, leave a comment down below or hit me up on Twitter. The game's up on itch.io, so if you want to play it, there's a link down in the description, and I did make a how to play video on that page that kind of spells things out, so there you go. thank you all so much for watching this video and going on this journey with me. I promise the next one's gonna be back to the usual stuff, and that's it. I'll see you next time. Bye!